Okay, I know we're in Romans 12, and
I marked on 17.
yeah,
27. No.
it's 17 because
Right.
we just kind of started there. It's been a while. Oh, well, this group is, it has been suggested to me, maybe we had suspend this for the summer. Last summer, we kept it going, seemed to work. Yeah, we did. And I have no problems with that. I'd like to see something going on during the week here.
Me
so
too. You got nothing else
I think
to
we
do.
should continue it.
I work at the thrift shop after this, so I come in here and
One Friday.
Yeah.
eat my lunch.
Yeah.
So does I.
Thrift shop.
Move on.
Okay, I think I'm going to read this whole section from 17 to the end of the chapter, and then we'll come back, because it kind of ends the way it starts. And it says, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the sight of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, 'It is mine to avenge, I will repay,' says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals upon his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." And so, when we start at verse 17, do not repay anyone evil for evil. That is fundamental in the gospel message. And it's what I say that relates to the theology of the cross. And that is, you heard me say this, Christ was God. He was all powerful. He was absolutely right. He's perfect. He's everything. And look what they did to him. And in preparation for my sermon, I was doing some certain things. And in some communion prayers, they get pretty graphic about what was going on in the crucifixion. And what was the name? The Passion of the Christ, or the Christ, the Passion, or
There was a Passion of the Christ.
the Passion of the Christ. It was not easy to look at, but the torture and the crucifixion of Christ was probably well depicted for the most part. The only thing I had against it, the Romans wouldn't have taken that much time. I mean, they were good at their business, and they would have been done with it, and he'd have been hanging up, and they wouldn't have taken 2 hours for what they could have done in 10 minutes. But Christ had all this evil heaped upon him for absolutely nothing he did. But he didn't fight back. In one of the Gospels, it says the angels are at heaven were straining for that command. And they would have come down and kicked some behinds. But he never gave it. He sacrificed it for our benefit, his enemy's benefit. So that doing that, we would receive this gift of pardon and redemption and salvation. That's the theology of the cross. Absolutely right. But he sacrificed it for our good. So Paul is using that theology. And theology isn't a bad word, although our churches, the Christian churches, I never took a theology class. Always took a doctrine class, or just something about the word theology people didn't like.
I think that's better than doctrine. That's like indoctrinating. Mind warping.
I think what Dr. Thompson was at, I think that might have been theology. And it was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, bad timing.
I always sat
You were
behind
about to
David
sleep at
Ladd
lunch.
because he was a big guy and I could go to sleep. But the trouble is, I'm still listening. So, do not repay anyone evil for evil. And what I tell people when I teach this, God gave us a lot of tools to fight in this world. But the tools of evil, he has restricted us from using. And when you think about that, that has a lot of implications about who we are and how we are to repay. And some of the things I hear on the news, it just, it disturbs me because they are quote unquote Christians. And they're armed to the teeth, and it wouldn't bother them a bit to shoot everybody up if they were encroaching upon them. And I'm thinking, Christians, and we have been instructed not to use evil to fight evil.
Then why do you call them Christian?
Remember I did this?
Yes, I know, but why even do that? Just forget
Well,
it.
because they wouldn't be the first group in any generation who thought that. Although you've got to realize for a good long time in the church was pacifist. And I can't tell you when the dividing line started. It wouldn't surprise me when Constantine took over, then that they would bear arms. Because Constantine married the church to the state. And what happened at that time, when they married each other, the state became the protector of the church by force.
Was that prior to the Crusades then?
Yes, you're talking the 5th century, 1412 or something. So that's the 5th century.
Okay.
And so the church didn't use force itself, but it had force available to it. It was a marriage. They scratched each other's back. And a lot of historians said at that point, that's when the church lost its holiness, the power of its holiness, because it married evil. And anytime the church and the state ever tried to get together, it never has worked in history. The church is not part of this world. And so do not repay evil for evil, even if evil is thrown your way, and even if evil kills you. Because death is not the worst thing that can happen to us. So that principle is, God has given us a lot of tools, and he just mentioned them in there, how we overcome the world, but fighting the world's evil with evil isn't in our toolbox. That's hard for us to grasp in our culture, in our upbringing, and in our country. That just isn't the way it's done. But Paul's pretty clear about that.
This morning, thank you, they were talking about the shooting in South Carolina, and there was a Baptist minister, doctor on, and he said the killer would have to die, it's biblical. The killer would have to die.
Well, that's because he's a Baptist and he's a Protestant,
And I
and
wonder what
he gives
using.
equal weight of authority to the Old Testament as he does to the New
So
Testament.
he's using the Old Testament. for
So he's crying out biblical authority, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Our tradition of the Christian Church as Church of Christ and the Restoration Movement is the Old Testament is no longer our authority. Doesn't mean we kick it out. It doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. It's not our authority because we're under a new covenant. And what part of old don't you get in verses new? But in the New Testament, it does state one of the jobs of the government is to provide justice. And I have no wrong reason for him to go through the justice system. But to call for his execution is premature. I mean, it could happen.
Yeah.
And
So that would be the justification,
The-
that the government would do it.
yeah, and that's part of the government, and Paul Wright kind of lays out a guideline of what governments do. And one is to keep the citizens safe and to provide justice. And so
So if someone's breaking into our house wanting to harm us, then call the police and they can shoot.
Yep,
Okay, gotcha. Because
You
I've
have-
never heard
You
this
have to have power
before.
present.
because this is,
They have to have a gun to shoot.
and I've changed. I grew up hunting
You
and
gotta have a-
shooting and pistols and rifles. I have nothing against that per se. I have moved, I have come to understand, I will never, once I got rid of my handguns, I just said I'd never own another handgun. And it's for theological and philosophical principles. Because that handgun was designed just to kill people. So, but with rifles, you can make, that was sporting and hunting. I do have a problem with assault rifles. That's a hunting rifle? Give me a break. You only need a single shot.
Gotta assault them.
But see, and I won't push that on anyone. That's where I have come to. That I came to a point, I will not own a handgun. So I got rid of mine. I finally got rid of my rifles because I couldn't hunt the way I like to hunt. I'm not going to be a road hunter. And I'm too broken up and old to go in those deep holes I used to. Because I don't want them to have to carry me out.
So Wanda raised a very interesting question about where you are using, I guess, weapons for preemptive. I mean,
It's
like
defense.
So you're not repaying evil. You're just saying, yeah, I have this something that you may not want to come closer to, but it's an interesting.
Well, and you got to remember the history of that early church was martyrism. I mean, they didn't put up a fight.
No.
They didn't have
They didn't, well, I can say that because some church leaders had to say, well, don't, volunteer, which a lot of them people did, or there was a group that would. But try to live in peace. The time, and this persecution came basically for one reason, and that was, it's called emperor worship. Once a year, you had to go in and give your allegiance to the Roman emperor. Burn incense to his altar and say, Caesar is Lord. Christians could not do that. Because only Christ is Lord. A couple things happened out of that. One is you could be banished or you could be martyred. Because they considered you an atheist. Which is unusual, but you weren't believing in the right God. And you lost your economic ability because you couldn't participate, especially in 1 Peter is written to those who were kicked out of guilds. It was silversmith guilds, goldsmith guilds, this stonemasons guild. It's like our unions, like the maritime union. You go down to the hall and so many ships are in, they hire out so many crews. You go down to your guild and that's where you got your jobs. Well, the guilds were highly pagan and immoral. And once you became a Christian, you couldn't participate in the guild's culture. And once you couldn't do that, you couldn't get a job. So First Peter says, even though you lost your household, there is a better household that you have received, and that's the household of God. So this whole idea is the church did not fight back. They practiced that theology of the cross. Even though I'm right, in the eyes of God, they accepted whatever came their way. Again, I can't tell you when the line changed. I'm guessing around the time of Constantine. As Dr. Walker, our history professor, says, now how do you think that Constantine had this vision that he was going to conquer by the sign of the cross? He crosses the river next day, and every soldier had a cross on his shield, which didn't happen in 12 hours. So Constantine becomes really the first government authority, emperor, president, whatever, that used the church to move his cause along. And when I observe contemporary history, that's still in progress or part of our system. And I just want the church and Christians to realize, you could be being used. Just like Constantine used the church for his purpose. And then when they married up, the church became the loser.
There's almost there's such conflict between things. I look at the Amish about 10 years ago when that man walked in and killed the 10, or I think they shot up 10 little girls, and some of them died, but the Amish community came out and forgave the shooter and helped their family out and everything, which is like, boy, talk about that. To me, that's kind of the ultimate. And then the opposite we have is on Veterans Day, we put everybody's picture up who served in the military and, you know, give them a high five.
And that story is in our book when we did that series on forgiveness. We talked about that. That very day, they were at the family of the shooter, the wife, with, you know, potluck food, surrounding her to protect her. And they literally did forgive them.
That's what
Or
we're
him.
talking about.
And, but that's, you know, basically that's what the theology of the cross is. He sacrificed, and by doing that, he forgave. He didn't use weapons of evil, which was totally at his disposal, but he chose not to. And Paul says we aren't to use them. And what I like, you don't see it as much anymore, but especially, well, yeah, we've kind of calmed down. But abortion clinics, Christians out there marching with these placards, hitting everybody over the head with them, calling them all kinds of good names because they're wanting to use the abortion clinic, and then in the next breath saying, God loves you. I'm sitting there and doesn't really sound like a consistent message here. And that's basically the inconsistency when we fight evil with evil and then try to tell everybody God loves you and His grace is there. And He wants to, you know, it's just, we've got to live out what that theology of the cross in our lives. That is the message we're trying to get across to the world. Okay, then it says, be careful to do what is right in the sight of everybody. And most people, if you do what is right, they're going to just leave you alone for the most part.
In the sight of everybody.
And yeah, I mean, as I said, the early church fathers had to say, there's people who are just being, what?
Naughty.
A pain in the neck because they just stuck it out there. Paul says you don't, you know, have to wear it on your sleeve, or just live at peace, doing what is right. I mean, if your neighbor needs help, help him out. And you don't hear much about it, but that had been back in the, let's see, I went to college in the 70s, so we're talking 70s, 80s. It was called friendship evangelism. And the whole idea was, instead of standing on a soapbox in the street corner, just invite your neighbor to a barbecue. And don't get upset if he brings a beer. Just develop a relationship. Get to know them. Don't be judgmental. Just become friends with them. And just wait upon them. And if any opportunity came, don't be afraid to share. But the intention is never to get them in the church. The intention is to become friends with them. And that is the starting point. And you let that friendship dictate whatever. And that's basically Paul. Just kind of live under the radar.
How do you deal with the Yamamotos and the Hitlers of the world and the Stalins of the world?
Well,
You let the government take care of it. Call the police.
basically, it
All
is
the
up.
non-Christians can do it for you.
And I should have looked that
Now
up.
we sound like the Jehovah's Witnesses now.
Well, basically, that is the purpose of the government.
Okay, that's the military.
And I do know soldiers served, and I'm trying to think where in the Bible it talks about that. The role as a soldier is, and I can't think where it is, now I'm going to have to look it up.
Oh.
It kind of limits what they can do as a soldier. You're to be a good soldier.
You can't have a rifle.
And that hasn't been, you know, there's four,
There are Christian church chaplains in the military.
well, that's right.
I mean, so it's
But they're not carrying a rifle. And this whole idea
They're all
of
qualified.
four justifications of war.
They're all
And one
qualified
is a
weapons.
just war. And I don't care how much you argue, the United States always went to war under the doctrine of a just war. And, you know, again, it comes down to a personal decision you're going to make. And that is, will you carry a weapon? I probably now would not carry a weapon, but I would serve. And I wouldn't bother me to serve on the front line. I wouldn't carry a weapon.
And what would you do on the front line then?
Be a medic,
Oh.
do whatever.
Just stand there.
Pacifist,
Uh,
hippie,
But no, the pacifists wouldn't even get in the army.
Yeah.
But I feel it would be my duty to be there.
and I do, you serve too.
And
You didn't have
and
a choice.
again, it comes when my story is when I tried to get to Vietnam 3 times, never worked out. Finally dawned on me 20 years later, maybe God really didn't want me there. But I was actively trying to get there.
In the Christian church, all the chaplains are all officers, and they all qualify at the firing ranges.
At the what?
Firing range with a pistol and a rifle. To be an officer, you qualify. You must qualify.
I'm not sure about that.
I can
Hey.
tell you.
Whether they do, whether they're required or not is something else. Whether they do is another thing. Almost became a chaplain until I knew the military well enough that they say your chaplaincy, your first allegiance to God, and I'd say no. It's always to the commanding officer. And but it comes down to personal choice of what and I'm never going to judge anybody if they take up arms. For me, that would be harder for me to do nowadays. Back then, it would have been easy.
You're old.
Yeah.
Not steady.
But you know, even the most pacifist groups depend upon the government to provide them
In the standing army.
their lifestyle. But that's in our country. Move that back 2,000 years ago in the churches of the Roman Empire, no one was looking after the church. The church was trying to be annihilated, but they still held to these principles.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, so it's a struggle because remember, we are people of light living in darkness. Like I said, we have been given certain tools to fight darkness, but in the toolbox isn't anything of evil. We're never told we can fight evil with evil. I've read what we can fight evil with already. What did it say?
Grace,
With
love.
good. But I will tell you, and I've only been there once because I can't even find anybody down here who will go through the lava tube with me down here.
Oh, don't.
But we were at the 8 caves lava tubes, and you go in the upper one, and it was the first time in my whole life I've been in absolute dark.
Pretty dark.
I mean, I don't care how close you got your hand to your eyeball, you weren't going to see it. But what is amazing is that total darkness, because I was running with the high school kids. We just had little flashlights, but it's amazing how much light that little light provided in total darkness. And basically, Paul's writing practical instructions to the church. He just has spent all these chapters about theology. Now he's writing about practicality, and he says, in this dark, evil world, as a people of light, your little light will make a big impact of how people see you. Now you got to remember, this church in Paul's day was not aligned with the church or with the government. The government was totally opposed to this church. And they were starting to take steps to get rid of this group. So we didn't have the ear of the government. We didn't even have a lot of people in government who were Christians. So we were totally at the mercy of the Roman Empire and the citizenry where we lived. And for a good long time in our history, they didn't want us, they didn't like us, and they tried to get rid of us. And this is the culture that Paul's writing to. Now, the church at Rome was in existence, it was visible, and he's telling them, just live under the radar. Do what is good, and don't really try to make trouble for yourselves. Live at peace. Is that where he says this? If possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. So do your very best to be friendly or friends with people around you. Don't antagonize them. Don't go out of your way to get them mad at you. Now, I will say that we are told certain things we're not supposed to do, and we aren't supposed to cross those lines. And like I said, Christians would not say Caesar is Lord. They would not cross that line. And when they wouldn't step over that line, then things happened to them. But they accepted the consequences of their faith. Whatever it may be, whether it was banishment or death or anything in between. They just wouldn't step over it, and they took the consequences. Kind of like when you speed a boat and you slay.
Yeah.
And then Paul says, do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. As it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. So, if you think any injustice is happening to you because of your relationship and faith in Christ and your stand for righteousness, you're just going to have to trust God will balance the scales in the end. Because Paul just says it's not your right or authority to do that. Whose is it? Now, and this is an old quote, and I thought I knew where I read it, and I've gone back to find it, and I haven't found it, but it's something about the judgment of God is slow, but it grinds exceedingly fine. And the gist of that saying is, well, you might not get it today, but when it comes, God's righteous judgment will prevail. Now I say that because remember, God is a God of grace, mercy, and forgiveness. And I've talked about this. You think somebody really, especially with Christians who really do you dirty, and you like to slap them around and get your revenge from them, and you get to thinking, the same grace that got me where I am is the same grace that's covering them. So ultimately, God's got to sort it all out. And I don't know how he's going to do it, but I'm sure it's going to grind pretty fine. But I will say, people really do not want justice. You really do want mercy and pardon and forgiveness. Because if everybody sought justice, we'd probably be on the wrong end of the stick, personally. So, and again, this is really fine. And see, under the law, the Jewish thinking was, you know what a balance scale looks like. And on one side was all the good stuff, and on the other side was the bad stuff. And in the end of your life, you were always hoping the good outweighed the bad. And if it did, then God owed you. But you never knew where the scale was balanced at. And as Christians, under God's system we have with the New Covenant, the scale could be tipped on the bad side, but there's something called grace, pardon, and forgiveness. And so, it's sometimes not as black and as white as we'd like to make it. We try to live within the scope of our relationship with Christ, to do the right thing, to live at peace, and to accept the consequences that, yes, we do believe, and this is what we can do, and this is what we won't do. But that grace covers a multitude of a lot of people.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was reading, and I can't remember, I think it was in Luke where Jesus is talking to them, how he sent them out and he told them not to take a purse and not no sword. But then he says, but now I tell you to sell everything and get a sword. What did he
Well,
mean
he
by
did
that?
say to carry a sword.
What does that mean?
Well,
Need to check yourself.
it's a little knife. It's not an
He doesn't
offensive
tell them
weapon.
to defend himself. I mean, it sounds like that in a way, but it.
Well,
it
it's
wouldn't be what
like
he's
when I went to
saying.
the when I went to the courthouse to pay my fine, and when I went to the Social Security, I forgot about the courthouse. I carry a pocket knife. Carrying anything? Yeah. He says, I'll hold it until you get done. I had to take this back to the car at Social Security. But this, of course, people have made smaller things than this offensive. But what he's really talking about is I'm not even sure it's what you call it, a defensive weapon. It's just like a pocket knife.
I don't know, he just said sell everything and get a
Yeah.
sword. I thought that was pretty important.
So why do you carry a knife?
So I can open envelopes, so I can cut my fingernails, so I can cut the fish, I can cut my line, wherever I want a knife.
Cut his apples.
So that doesn't sound like.
Yeah, well, I'll do it for mine. Betty will never let me cut an apple with my pocket knife. And I was playing cribbage the other day, and she didn't have pigs, so I was whittling off matchsticks so it fit in the hole.
So do you think that's what he's referring to when he says to sell everything and get a sword?
Well,
I'd have to see that.
I'd have to see what he is. He says you can carry a knife, but it isn't a sword. It's more, it's not an offensive weapon he's asking you to carry.
Why would you sell anything though to get?
Well, basically he's saying because your evangelistic mission is not dependent on you providing for yourself. It's God providing for you. So if you go to a place, they are to take care of you, feed you, shelter you, but you're only supposed to stay for a while. If they refuse, you shake the dust off your sandals and keep moving. The idea of all that is you're depending on God to take care of you in this mission. And because he sets out, I don't want you to pack a bag for this. Travel light. And then I want to finish this, and I only have a few minutes. And then he flips the coin on all of this, just like Jesus did. On the contrary, you're not to repay evil for evil. You're not to seek vengeance. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, you don't slap him around. If he is thirsty, you don't poke his eye out. You give him something to drink. So it's going back to what Jesus says. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. That comes back again to the theology of the cross. And that is how we are to live. It is totally opposite of how the world thinks we should live.
So this time I've been doing some internet searches on do Christians think war is okay. I found 3 examples all in the Old Testament, not a single one in the New Testament.
And see, what they call a just war. That's how we live. That's the only reason Wilson went to war in World War I. He was a pacifist inside and out. And but he finally agreed because he was fighting a just war. That was an explanation of World War II.
But it was a government taking care of its citizens.
And it was, but you really look, and I just saw a thing on Roosevelt. Theodore. Theodore, no, who's the big...
Franklin.
FDR.
And even Theodore was in World War. These wars were across the ocean. And both of them had to fight this isolationism. And I didn't realize it was so strong at the beginning of World War II and what they were saying. Franklin was the president of the time because he knew how to step through all this and to kind of move what he wanted when he knew no one The politicians didn't want it, but the citizenry didn't want him to get involved in another foreign war. It wasn't until Pearl Harbor was bombed that he could stand up and act for a declaration of war against Japan.
He was well involved in before that with the Lend-Lease.
Oh, yeah.
He was
I mean,
getting
he
all
was
arms to
tiptoeing
Britain
through, and he
Yeah,
and
so
Churchill were good friends, doing all that he could without upsetting that. But what I did not realize until I saw that, he still could not declare war on Germany, and Germany made a misstep. And they declared war on us. And the next day, the whole Congress voted unanimously to declare war on Germany. But this whole idea of isolationism, you know, that was across the ocean. In our day and age, oceans don't mean a thing anymore. And so it is up, you know, everybody has to come to this on their own. And what am I, almost 66 years, through a lot of study and just my experience, this is where I came out. I will not make my religious experience the standard for anyone. And I will not make it a test of fellowship for those who might agree or disagree with me. This is where I am at. I find strong justifications for it in the Word. But not everybody has lived my life. Not everyone has had my experience to come out to the conclusion I came to. I'm just telling you, the early church, that until a certain point in history, it was a pacifist movement. They would not draw a sword against another person. They would die first instead of doing that. Okay. And doing good to your enemies puts interest in your bank reward account, because it says you'll heap burning coals upon his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. I'll just close with this. The only way the Middle East will ever come to any kind of understanding and peace is with this word called forgiveness. Because, see, they've gone beyond an eye for an eye and a tooth. It's back beyond the Old Testament. You do it to me, I'm going to kill 10 of you. Well, if you kill 10 of me, I'm going to take out your city. Well, if you take out my city, I'll take out 10 cities. If you take out 10 cities, I'm going after your whole nation. The only way you can break that cycle, and this is what God understood at the cross, wasn't with more power. It was with a thing called forgiveness. Forgiveness stops retaliation. Our Father in heaven, we just thank you. You've given us a tall order to live by. It's not always easy. But just fill us with your Spirit, that we have understanding of what it is that you went through, that we might have peace with our Father. For this we pray in your Son's name. Amen.